Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by developing yourself, developing your skills, your habits, your network, and more. My name is Aaron Hayslip. I'm one of your co-hosts, and today we're joined by Paul Kim. Paul Kim is a designer at Dropbox. He's going to be walking us through his journey of becoming a designer, having graduated, college with a different degree that's not design. In his case, it was chemistry. So we're sort of going to be taking the parallel track here of what it would look like to become a designer versus a software engineer, because this is a question I get quite a bit from people switching into tech is, should I become a software engineer? Should I become a designer? Is one easier? So we never talked about it before, and I'm excited to have Paul on. I hope you enjoy. All right, we got Paul Kim on the podcast. Paul, you're obviously an old friend, just kind of explaining for the listeners. You're an old friend of mine. We go way back to college. Well, kind of. We weren't in college together because we went to different colleges. College ministry, whatever. Long story. I was explaining to you before we started recording that what I really want to talk about with you is design, because you've got now this incredible career as a designer, design leader. I don't even know what's your current title?
Product design lead, I believe.
At Dropbox, right?
At Dropbox, yes.
Okay, awesome. And so what I was trying to say is a lot of people come to me talking about wanting to get into tech, and they have this sort of crossroads of, do I either, or I guess a fork in the road, I don't know what's the saying here. Do I go with design or do I go with coding? And I always give them the coding path, because for me, and I want you to help me understand this, for me, I'm always like, coding is black and white, right? You can either write JavaScript or you can't write JavaScript. Design always seems to me like it's so abstract. Like, what makes for a good design? And I know that's wrong of me, so I want you to help me set the record straight. So all I have to say, would love to hear about like how you came about this, because I remember you like years ago were also thinking about the same question, right? Like you almost became a developer. So give us your backstory.
Backstory, yeah. So my education is in chemistry and biomedical engineering, which I feel like a lot of people these days, it's very common like for them to not utilize their degree. I think you have like a liberal arts degree or something, right?
Yeah, religious studies. Yeah, it's okay. You can say that college is useless. It is.
Varsity is where it's at. So I graduated. I didn't pursue science, obviously. I was going to go to med school, decided not to do that, and then went to go kind of basically a bunch of different routes where, I mean, essentially what I was doing was kind of more project management, like in the communications arena, like in marketing. This was, I want to say back in, but it doesn't feel that far back, but back in like the 2012 or something like that, I guess. So back then, I think what is called product design is what most people would have called UX design, or even like early versions of it was probably called web design, which I think a lot of people who were in like a more traditional like graphic design field were starting to do like small HTML, CSS, Java a little bit, like here and there, like on the web. And if they had some like visual design skills, then they would kind of like transfer that over into the web. So UX kind of started to become a thing. At that point, I was dabbling like in our marketing and communications like design world, and so I was like, is this what I want to do? Do I want to go graphics? But my background being in chemistry and engineering, being a little bit more, it's funny because you're saying that like design feels like kind of like more subjective, like not black and white. I come from a very like black and white, like if you add this reagent to this reactant, this thing happens like all the time. Like, there's no if, then, or but, like, so like my brain kind of works that way too. And so when I learned about UX, it was really helpful for me because it helped me know that there was a form of design that didn't just require this, like, how many shades of red are there and pick the right one. Like, it's like, I need more reasoning behind why I would pick, this certain red over this other red. So anyways, I like heard about UX. Like, I can't honestly remember how I heard about it. But the more I researched it, I would still say this is relatively true, even with like how the field has evolved over the past couple of years. I think it's like a good mix of like research, design, and I'll kind of like unpack what I mean by design, and then uh, like I feel like there's a bunch of terms on this third bucket, but like either like psychology, cognitive
Mm,
behavior, these kind of like understanding how people interact with things,
yeah.
like habit formation, all these like kind of like interesting things that how humans interpret the world essentially. I think there's a lot of different buckets that can fit into. But so, anyways, I thought that was like a really interesting like combination of a field rather than just like not that graphic design is like a bad field, but for me it was hard. I needed a field where I could use research, understand humans, and kind of create something that had like more rationale behind it rather than just like I picked these shades and these shapes and put it in and it's an album cover and here you go.
Yeah,
Like
right,
a
right.
blank slates were kind of harder for me. And so
Yeah.
anyways, I discovered it. I forgot how, and then I think I took at the time I forget the name of it, but it's nothing like comparable design boot camps like Parsity now. I forget what it was called, but I think it's more comparable to like maybe like a Udemy course.
Okay.
Like it was more self-paced. I think there were like people involved, but I mean this was like early like boot camp days. Like there might have been like two or three boot camps in the world at that
Like
point, and
design boot camps, you mean? Or
yeah,
yeah.
design boot camps, and so I did that. I look back now because I've also mentored for design boot camps, and I see like the work that comes out of it, and I'm like, wow, like the stuff I did back then and the stuff that comes out now. I think a lot of students sometimes are like, oh, like this isn't good work. I'm like, this is way better than what I
Yeah.
think I did back in
Yeah.
2012.
Yeah, I feel the same way about coding boot camps. Like I always tell people that my first job, I worked at a startup here in Austin, and my first job, I remember I didn't know what the return statement did in JavaScript, and I was like hired as a JavaScript developer. And like one of the most basic concepts is like returning something from a function. Like literally,
Mm-hmm.
that's what a function's for. It's for returning a
Mm-hmm.
value. And I didn't know what the return statement did. I was like, oh, it just exits the function, right? It's like, no, it returns something. It's called return. So anyway, yeah, totally, man. I feel that. I think the bar has gotten higher for sure,
Mm-hmm.
or seemingly at least, right? Like people think the
Yeah.
bar is higher than it actually is, probably.
Yeah.
All right, I'm
Yeah.
going to pause you real quick because I think you started to hit on a few things, which was you said design is not just design; it's design, it's research, it's psychology, which I think hits at the first thing for a lot of people who are in this position where they're thinking, oh, maybe I should be a designer, which is they don't really know what being a designer means, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you were sort of implying that most of us think that it's art, it's like it's like
Mm-hmm.
computer art, it's graphic design,
Mm-hmm.
and because
Mm-hmm.
that's what it was for so long. And then you said at some point it started mixing in, HTML, CSS, and you said Java. We can't edit that out, so sorry. What you
Mm-hmm.
meant was JavaScript. That's fine. We won't we
Mm-hmm.
won't we won't we won't make you sound silly. But um, so what do you actually do at your job?
Yeah.
Like you're not sitting there on Photoshop, right?
No.
Like putting pixels together. Like what
No. No. No.
what do you do? Like what does this look like to bring these three things together? Like give me like an example of something maybe that you've worked on at Dropbox.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, I think it's similar to like engineers. You're not just coding. You're not just designing all day. Like you are also in like a lot of meetings, which is just anybody in tech.
Yeah.
But like specifically for like design, like when we think about like, like actually like sitting down, like focusing, like making stuff, it can be it depends on like where you are in the design process. So maybe I'll give like a high level overview and like maybe like an
Yeah.
activity in each of these processes. So if you're early in the process, you're probably doing some type of like research. It depends on if you have like a researcher you're working with. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So you're working through like like who do I need to talk to? Like who are my customers? Like how are we going to go find those people to go talk to? What are the research goals, like understanding like the actual like questions we need to ask to answer those goals, and then actually then conducting the research and analyzing that into like actionable insights that the team can do. So that's kind of like early stuff. So you're not really like in pixel mode, like you're not creating anything.
Yeah.
um, if you're creating something, it's a session guide, right? Like that's still like a creation of something, but it's not something visual. And then after that, like I would say like this middle chunk is kind of what I think most people think about is like design is like, okay, like now I'm like drawing shapes and like putting buttons on a screen
Yeah.
somewhere and like thinking about how it works. And then like, so there's different levels of, like you'll hear terms like lo-fi, hi-fi. That just means fidelity of like the designs. And so you might see it's kind of like an architect's like blueprint. Like there's like,
Yeah.
just lines, and then you start to add like the interior designer and like they start to add color and things like that. So there's that phase, and that phase depends on like how long it should take. And I think that's what most people, I think, in their brain think is design.
Yeah.
That is probably not the bulk of what I do. And like in my career, like I don't think I even spend 50% of my time doing that.
That's awesome.
And then there's a portion of like creating prototypes from those designs and then retesting them. So like you're trying to evaluate if like the solution you created was actually correct. And then there's like a whole other chunk which then starts to like kind of like merge your world with mine is I think I just heard this term yesterday. Like we used to call it, or a lot of people in the industry call it dev handoff, which basically means like a designer takes their designs, like specs it out and like hands it off like over the fence
Yeah.
proverbially to the engineer. But I think I think I heard a term from our design ops people, like they want to call it like design integration. But basically what that means is like the designer is working with the engineers to kind of like understand like how this is going to get built. But the engineers, if like you're working with like a very collaborative designer, would have included that engineer from the very beginning, from like
Yeah.
research, on, and so that the engineer kind of understands how to architect the code, understanding feasibility and kind of like evaluating like trade-offs and things like that. So that like middle chunk is what everyone thinks, but as I mentioned earlier, like that's like not even the lion's share of like where I'm at. I mean, like so much of it is like communication,
Yeah.
which I think is also it's just a skill across the board, like regardless if you're a designer or engineer. So there's a lot of like stakeholder management, like making sure the research is aligned, but then there's a lot of communication from the design phase too, of like, like, hey, like what does this wireframe look like? Like, give me feedback, and then like all the way through prototyping and building. Like there's a lot
Yeah.
of communication that's going on throughout that process.
And like you said something in there that I want to zoom in on, which is you said you're testing to see if your design is correct, which implies that like there's a good way to make a design and a bad way, right? It's not actually so subjective. So like that being said, like what's like the end goal of this design process? Like what does correct mean? Like what are the metrics in which you're like, gathering to see if this is something that's working or not?
Yeah. So I would say my hesitation in answering this is like I feel like I work with different. I'll tell you like the best case scenario and caveat that like it doesn't always happen this way. I think the best case scenario would be that like if you're on a product team like with engineers and product managers and like you're working through a solution, that solution should be predicated by a problem that you can actually validate and verify. Like what I mean by
Yeah.
that is like say that they're like, oh, like we saw this part of the flow tank. I should be able to ask the product manager a question of like, what do you mean by tank? Like, give me a metric, give me a value. And maybe it's not quantitative, it can even be qualitative. Like we get qualitative metrics all the time from like our customer teams or sales teams, like, app reviews and things like that. So it doesn't always have to be qualitative, but at least a signal that we can then go test against. And I think that's what I meant by like, we would evaluate the design to make sure that like, hey, like we actually solved a problem, because we can go back to the original signal and say, hey, like this design moved that, that data point somehow. Like, oh, like we actually saw this thing lift now. I think what happens a lot more times is it's just more like a gut or an
Yeah.
intuition or a business metric that they're like, we just need to push this thing forward, which is fine too. But like you still need something to like leverage to communicate back to the business, like, hey, like I did something with this thing that you were concerned about.
Yeah.
It can't just be this like, this like intuition of like, hey, like we just want this thing to kind of proverbially happen in our product. It's like, well, like we need something to like, anchor that on.
So give me an example. Like is most of the time whenever you're designing something, is it towards the goal of trying to get the user to do something or make it easy for the user to be able to do, like, what's the end goal of good design? Like, good design should do what?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways to answer this question. Um, um, I think it's a multifaceted answer. I'll give two though.
Okay.
Like one is, um, this is a this is a weird way to answer this question, but so I think there's a part that we would call like emotional design that I don't think gets a lot of attention. What I mean by that is like if I present you with a Daewoo back in the day, like I'm Korean, so I feel like I can like kind of crap on a Korean car. I don't even know that it exists today, or
I don't know what
like
that is.
yeah, right. It's a pretty crappy car, I think
Okay.
that we used
Okay.
to make, or like a I don't know what a nice car is, like a Lamborghini, right? Like most people are going to gravitate towards the Lamborghini and emotionally because there's something about that design that feels good to
Mm,
humans. Like there's just something about that, and there's way more studies, and there's actually some good books about it that you can go through. And so there is this part that's kind of untangible that does make good design, right? Like,
yeah. Okay.
and so like it like one example in my home that I really love is like the kitchen drawers that like kind of like slowly close. You know what I'm talking
Yes.
about? Like that's
Totally.
nice,
Yeah.
especially having kids like who are slamming cabinets all day. Like the fact that my baby can just like close the cabinet and it just slowly closes is
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Or
Like
it's
there's
like those
something
like
about that that's nice.
those like satisfying videos, that you watch on YouTube,
Yeah,
where it's people are like squishing things or they're cutting stuff, and you can't explain it, but it's like it just feels good to watch. It's the stupidest thing in the world to
yeah,
watch, but I
yeah.
totally get you. Yep.
But in the industry, we call this like a lot of people call this like delight,
Hmm.
and I think it's a fitting word. But also, what happens is because I think it's so intangible, and delight feels frilly in some ways. It's kind
Yeah.
of the first part of the design that gets cut in terms of like what gets into production.
Yeah.
So that's why I bring that up first because it does make good design. Like like you can launch 100 websites and you can kind of tell like oh like that one has like a good emotional design versus like the ridiculous MySpaces that we created back in our teenagers. Like
Yeah.
those don't elicit a lot of like great like emotional responses. So that's one bucket.
Yeah.
And
And
then I
like,
think the other bucket. Oh,
not to jump in, but I am. I do think some of these intangibles, though, they do bubble up to something tangible, because even recently I was talking with somebody about, like, how do you measure, like, so in my world, software engineering, like, how do you measure engineer productivity? Like, how do you measure like
mm-hmm,
productivity of a single engineer or an engineering team? And they're throwing out all these different kind of metrics. So like, well, time to first commit, which is like whenever you get onboarded, when do you push your first commit to GitHub, or when do you open your first pull request, or how many commits do you tackle, or how many tickets do you,
mm-hmm,
you know, uh, complete? And it's like all of
mm-hmm.
these are not good, because different pull requests are different levels of difficulty. Like, you can't really measure
Yeah,
contributions like
yeah,
that. And
no,
so someone threw out there like, well, how about sentiment? It's like, how much
mm-hmm,
do you like working here?
mm-hmm.
And I think most people's response to that is like, "Oh, that's a stupid way to measure productivity." I was like, "Really?" But have you
Mm-hmm.
ever met someone who like loves their job, but they like are not contributing, they're not part of the team, and they're not adding value? Like,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely not. And I think the same thing is probably true
Mm-hmm.
like with design, right? Like, have you ever met
Mm-hmm.
someone who like the feeling they get when they use a product feels good, but the product sucks? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that probably doesn't happen. So I do think that these intangibles end up bubbling up into something that's tangible. Okay, so you said that, which I think is really
Yeah.
awesome. What's the next one you were going to say before I stopped you?
Just functionality and usability, right? So I do think that there are two camps of designers. Like I think there's this kind of like visual, emotional, like kind of not. I don't want to use aesthetics because it
Yeah.
makes it sound cheap, but it is very valuable. I think there's a camp here, and then I think there's another camp which is like performance and functionality and like use and a term that people use a lot is like usability. And so when I think about that is like, the most famous one that people will use is, there's a guy named Don Norman. I think he wrote a book called The Design of Everyday Things, and he has this term called the Norman door. Basically, what that means is how many times have you like tried to open a door and it's really a push, not a pull,
Yeah.
or vice versa, and it's because your eyes. There's a term in design called like affordance. It's like the basically what that term means is like when you're looking at the door, what is it? What affordance is it giving you? What cues is it giving you to how to
Yep.
interact with it? And so, how do we make those things more usable? How do we, another term that people use is like, how do we like reduce friction? Which there's also like good friction, but like, like that I think other products have done that we can talk about too. But anyways, like usability is kind of focusing on kind of this, like, does it actually work? Like, does it, like, is it easy to use? Does it make sense? Can someone just like look at it and kind of like comprehend in their mental models how
Yeah.
that works? And so I would say like good design is kind of a mix of those two. Like I think of it kind of like, kind of going back to my science world, like I kind of think of it like a tree, right? Like there are organic parts that are happening, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also structural things that need to happen too. So you can't have one or the other. You kind of need to have both. But I do think that the industry kind of like leans a little bit more towards like the functionality. Like, does it just work?
Yeah. Right.
Can you get from point A to point B? Kind of situation, rather than like actually thinking about like the multifaceted way. Like even when you talked about like the sentiment thing, that reminds me of like how we like research. We never ask people like, do you like this thing?
Yeah.
That's like the worst question to ask people, because people are terrible at telling you what they want.
Right.
And so the way to kind of get around it, it's not always like, a surefire way to get around it, but it is kind of like to the survey question of like, you probably have been asked questions like, how much do you agree with this statement from scale of 1 to 5, right? We ask it on a scale because people are more accurate in a scale than binary, like I like it or I don't like it, because people will say like, I love that movie and I love my child. Well, the love for your movie and the love for your child are going to be different, right? So people are kind of like terrible at telling you those things. So anyways, like we kind of like try to understand and leverage like both worlds as best as possible to kind of come to like a good design.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, no, I think it's super helpful to clarify that like there's so much more science to design. And I think really what it gets at for people who are changing careers is they want to know if there's a path, right? And I think that's, we have a mutual friend, I won't call him out, but for so long he was thinking about doing design and felt sort of drawn to it. And I think he ended up choosing development, coding, based off this idea like, hey, there seems to be like an actual path to this. Whereas like I don't know what the path is
Mm-hmm.
to being like not a designer to
Mm-hmm.
being a designer. And so can you talk about that a little bit? Like, do you feel like the path to becoming a software engineer is more clear than the path to becoming a designer, or am I wrong about that?
I think the perception, if people perceive that, I think it's validated.
Okay.
Because of like, this is a weird analogy too. I used to play violin as a kid, so it's kind of like an orchestra. Like when we would audition, it's like you've got like 500 violins trying out for like 30 spots, or
Yeah.
like 80 cellists trying out for like 15 spots. So like your odds are better. And I kind of feel like that perception does exist in the market today. It's kind of like there's like what do they call those, like apprenticeship programs at tech companies for
Yeah.
engineers. Like that doesn't really exist for designers. And then when you look at the job board, like if there's like a drop down for like what team do you want, like you click engineer or you click design, like it's the same kind of thing of like there's so many more roles. Like the likelihood of you getting an engineering role just is perceived to be easier than it is like for a designer.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's sort of like, if you have a building project, you're going to have one architect and 30 construction workers, so I think that's probably similar with design and
Maybe.
engineering, right? Like, I mean, you don't need 10 designers, and I mean, there's always more
No.
engineers than designers because
Yeah.
it's just
But
the
I
complexity is
do think
increased.
the industry does have more concerted like avenues that are like that are perceived to be easier, but even like being at companies like I know that the sheer number of people applying to those are just larger than probably like the designers that are applying to just like, like a job posting than these like,
Yeah.
entry points like into the company.
So
So
how did you get in? Like, I mean, because so last I remember you, right? Like we were working
mhm,
at you started working at the Stone, which is the church we went to. Which, by the way, like
mhm,
church is a um interesting word for it because it's this massive place that I think a lot of businesses are not run nearly as smoothly as this this church. I think
sure.
experience working there counted for more than like working with a youth group for example.
Mhm.
So what yeah but yeah how did you transition in? Like what did you have to have completed or done, or who did you have to know to get your foot in the door?
Yeah. I mean, I think the market is very different now than it was back then. But I mean, I
Yeah.
would say that the irreducible minimum still that's true then as it is now is a portfolio. And I think when I say portfolio, I want to clarify what I mean by that. It's not just like a collection of screens, but it's also not like these like you know, massive long essays, and case
Yeah.
studies. Like it's somewhere usually in between. And I kind of feel like a lot of people when they hear portfolios, they're like, oh, cool. Like I just need a bunch of like visuals, or like, oh, I like need to like do like a full write up that's like if I printed it out would be 20 pages. And it's really not. It's just a collection of work that will help showcase like what your capabilities are.
Yeah.
At least, a little bit more than a snapshot, enough to kind of like whet the appetite that someone wants to talk to you. um, Getting that first job honestly is probably the lion's share of the work to get into the industry. I
Yeah.
mean, for numbers sake, I remember I had like a Google sheet when I was like applying for my first job, and I think I applied to like I forget the numbers, I can pull it up, but it was over 100 jobs, at
Yeah.
least 100 jobs, just over 100 jobs. I think I got 15 responses. And when I say responses, not yeses, like a response, like
Yeah.
even if it was a robot. So like 90% of them didn't even like have like an automated response.
Yeah.
Of those like 15, I think like four of them were like a hey, let's talk to you. And then two of them ended up being like an actual interview. And then one of them actually became an offer. And that's the one I just took
Yeah.
because I was like, I just need to get in.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the same thing today. That it's kind of this like, just if you have something, just take it. But like at that point, like it felt very much to me like I just have to take this offer, and I did, and that helped me.
Yeah, actually, I think I don't think that would work at all these days. I think you would get no offers if you tried to do and it comes back to like, we always talk about this with, I'm trying to like compare, like, okay, if someone came to me and they wanted to become a designer, what would I
Mm-hmm.
tell them to do? And I think same kind of advice we give them for the job search is like, make real connections with real people. I think if you have a portfolio, and a lot of people do this with coding, right? They think, oh, I got to make 10 coding projects and put them on this website. It's like, that's cool, but like, who's coming to your website? Like, like
Mm-hmm.
no one's going to your website. So
Mm-hmm.
you've got to make those connections. So I think that probably worked then, and it took a lot of just hustle back then. But I think these days it takes an extra like something, because
Yes.
like that idea of like switching into tech is like mainstream now. Like back then, whenever you and I did it, like switching into tech was just like a weird thing. Like, you can't switch
Mm-hmm.
into tech. Like, you got a chemistry degree,
Mm-hmm.
or you got
Mm-hmm.
a religious studies degree. You're not switching to tech,
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, oh yeah, of course you're switching to tech. Like, you just went to this boot camp, right? So shouldn't you get a job now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the job search. What portfolio? That's like the end goal. I think that's awesome. And actually, when I'm thinking about this, like, there is such an opportunity for people who want to become designers right now to basically like, I think you could design real stuff. Like, you just get with some boot camp grads who are
Mm-hmm.
building out projects and be like, hey, I want to become the designer for you on this. Like, we're going to track these metrics. We're going to do this research. We're going to get like this group of people to like use the product. I'm going to do wireframes. I'm going to give you a deliverable. You're going to code it up. We're going to measure that. We're going to spit out a report. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you could go buck wild with all that kind of stuff. What are the skills that you need to learn to get to the point of being able to build that project? Then how do you learn those skills, right? Like, so like with coding, it's pretty not it's straightforward. It's super freaking hard, but it's straightforward, right? You like learn
Mm-hmm.
HTML, CSS, JavaScript, learn how to build like a front end framework, back end framework, design patterns, data structures, algorithms, build a bunch of stuff. bam, go, right? What's the
Mm-hmm.
equivalent in the design world?
So going back to that process, like, I mean, when I look at like boot camps, like we basically kind of teach that process, like from like research all the way to like build, or not, obviously the designers aren't building, but like the specking and like,
Yeah.
you know, the handoff process. So obviously like there's like research methodologies, and then there's like that craft of like, how do you actually like run that research, analyze that research. So that's kind of the front part. And then some of the skills that you're going to learn kind of like in the middle design phase is like, you know, like you have to learn the tool. Usually in the industry, it's either right now at this point, I think the lion's share market is in Figma, or Sketch.
Yeah.
It's not Photoshop. So if
Thank God.
people are wondering if they have to learn Photoshop to be a product designer, that is not true. That used to be the case way back in the day.
Yeah.
So anyways, you have to learn the tool, and then you have to like kind of like learn, you do have to learn some amount of like visual design principles, you know, and we do teach those things like in these like boot camps as well, or you can learn them as well. And then kind of the end is like, you know, how do you like stitch a prototype together? So essentially kind of like earlier when I said that process, like we have like principles and skill sets that you would kind of like pick up to be able to do that. The part I think that you were mentioning just now, though, that is, I think there's a part of it you can teach it. There's a part of it that I don't know that you really can, which is kind of like this like ownership and kind
Yeah.
of problem solving. When I don't mentor currently at a boot camp anymore, but when I did, I feel like I would see kind of two camps of students, like the
Oh,
ones
yes.
who kind of saw the boot camp as kind of this like factory, like input output. Like if I do
Yep.
this task, I get this result. Blah 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 blah. Like here's my portfolio. I'm done. You know, on my way. And that could work. I don't think that doesn't. It does work, but this kind of like idea that there's this like conveyor belt cookie cutter thing that's going
Yeah.
on. When I look at that portfolio versus the other side, which I think are the students that are like, hey, like here are some, I mean, this is maybe an intense way to say this, but like blood, sweat, and tears, like not really blood, sweat, and
Yeah.
tears, but you know, some like like what I mean by blood, sweat, and tears is more like ownership of like, hey, like I owned this problem, you know, like and sometimes that's like personal. Like what I mean by that is like I've had students who like take on a project that it's like, hey, like my brother has this, you know, medical condition, so like I want to build an app that helps people like do caretaking for this condition, and like be able to like tell that personal story and like own that and like
Yep.
run this like the design process through. And seeing that, it doesn't mean that that's like a surefire win to get a job, but it gets me more hooked to the
Yeah.
interview than like, oh, like I went to this boot camp and I did these 3 case studies and here it is. Like it's just more compelling of a narrative, and I have yet to really find a way to like teach that to people.
Totally.
I kind of feel like you can access it, but you kind of have to like personally want it too.
Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on, honestly, is probably the thing we talk about the most on this podcast, and really the point of the podcast, right? Which is, we call it develop yourself, because what I think we noticed is a lot of people come into boot camps thinking like, oh, sweet, like this is like the easy path, right? I just pay this money, go through this course, and then at the end of it, I get a job and I get rich and I get to work from home and drink beer sometimes. But the reality is those people never make it. Like they end
Mm-hmm.
up like hurting themselves far more than they help themselves. And I was looking at, I think I have an episode on this. Maybe it's the first one where we like look back, and I looked at stats, like literally a spreadsheet of every student we've had, looked at the
Mm-hmm.
ones who are successful versus the few who weren't, and try to figure out like what's the common denominator. Like, was it did they have a certain background or degree or age, or did they do this during the boot camp or that? And the most common thing they had was like it was just who they were before they came to the program, right? Like they were the kind of people who took ownership over things in their lives. Like they were the kind of people who like were productive, who if they wanted to make, maybe they didn't make good grades, but if they wanted to, they could have, right? They had the capability to achieve stuff. Like if they wanted to get up early every morning, like they could get up early every morning. Just like
Mm-hmm.
that kind of level of like basic ownership and being productive adults. I think that's like what it's about. And it's like, unfortunately, if you are coming to this for in the easy path, like it's not going to work out for you. So
Mm-hmm.
100%, man. I think that's like the thing. And how you develop that, like, I don't know. Like, even we created this thing called Dev 30, which is like this 30-day JavaScript course, except for instead of just working on JavaScript, we try and do like mindset. So we have like a daily podcast. Um, uh, what is the other stuff? I can't remember. Habits, right? So we help you like
Mm-hmm.
set up your schedule, network. So we encourage you like post on LinkedIn. And this idea that like, hey, if you're going to do well in this, like you need to develop like your whole self, right? I think
Yeah.
that's what you're talking about here is like in design, dude, there's no way like that you can make an easy path. Like you have to go above and beyond and like really actually learn this stuff. It's the hard way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's my soapbox, but I 100% agree with you. I think that's super good advice. Man, all right, we're coming up on our time.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is really amazing, by the way. We've never talked about design on here. And I think there's so many parallels, like this path of becoming a software engineer. And I think at least what you've done for me is helped me realize, like, oh, there really is a path to becoming a designer. And it's probably not, I don't think, any harder or easier. It's just different
Mm-hmm.
than
Mm-hmm.
becoming a developer. It's definitely
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And that was my fallacy, honestly. I started getting into all this because I wanted to be a designer. And I couldn't figure out how to make that happen. So like, but I could figure out how to write JavaScript, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I literally became a software engineer because I thought like that was easier to do. And
Mm-hmm.
I just got lazy and didn't go back to design. But
Mm-hmm.
um, any like parting advice or wisdom you'd offer to our listeners before we shut it down?
Yeah. I think like brands like Apple have made design like kind of this like elevated like persona of like this person who wears like, a black turtleneck and like has like flashy presentations, and like
Yeah,
they get to like utilize this from design. And I mean, like those people are out there, but like I wouldn't say that if you can't, if you play, Pictionary with your family and your sketches are god awful, like that is not an indication that you can't do design. I think at the end of the day, you're right. I think there's a lot of similarities between development and like being a coder and being a designer. Obviously there's differences, but like I kind of see them as like different mediums of problem solving.
yeah,
Like you write code, I move around a bunch of shapes and colors. At the end of the day, we're both solving problems, and I think that's what's compelling about like the tech industry is like it's just a bunch of problem solvers like who are like really interested to get into it. And
yeah,
so like if you want to be a designer and you think that means that your career is going to be like like a keynote on an Apple stage, like that's not true. Like for most everyone, like that's not the persona that they fit into. And then the opposite is not true too. It's like if you can't draw a perfect circle with a pencil like to save your life, like that also doesn't mean like you can't be a designer. I think to me, like I am very like, and we've had some of these conversations like offline, is like there is a path, I think, of this in between. I've been at a company at Indeed specifically where, and I think this is like more up and coming, where they call them like design technologists or like UX
yeah,
developers. Like there is this hybrid role, and I'm even personally like interested in that of like how do I leverage this gap between design and engineering. And so even though like like our conversation is kind of presenting these like two camps, there's also way more like that hasn't really been discovered in our fields. That that there's like in 10 years are probably like different specializations like within our fields, but then also
yeah,
between our two fields that I think are really interesting. So like don't feel like you have to like pigeonhole yourself
yeah,
today, that it's like, oh, like I have to be a developer, or I have to be a designer, or it's like, oh, I can never be a designer, or I can never be a developer. It's like, well, try it. I think like I did Dev 30 just to try it out, and I enjoyed it. Like I think the design bootcamp I was a part of, Design Lab, like has like a similar kind of like get your feet wet kind of program, before like committing like too much into it. I think
yeah.
those things are like really great on ramps, just so that you kind of like test it out before you go like fully into it. And so anyways, I think those are kind of my parting words is just kind of like the summary is like, don't pigeonhole yourself too early. Like things change so fast. Like, you're trying to become more aware of yourself too. And, I was that person that kind of thought like, oh, like design sounds cool. I don't want to do it because it sounds cool, but I also can't draw a circle to save my life. And I was like, oh, like there's a lot of us here, who like fall into this camp. So
See, and I
there's
was
people
really
who can't draw circles.
I was a great drawer as a kid. I was like always the best in class, and look at me. I was terrible at math.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm talking to the chemistry guy here, and he's the
exactly.
designer, I'm the developer. Awesome,
Yeah.
man. Well, good to have you. Thanks, Paul. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, that does it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. If you want to learn more about our online code school, Parsity, visit parsity.io. It's parsity.io. And please visit all of the other links in the Shameless Plugs section. That's all the stuff that Peter and I have going on. And yeah, that's all I got. See you guys next week.